Being able to draw in VR serves a lot of different experiences and a lot of different applications. Take, for example, social experiences like VR chat. There are some people who prefer not to speak for personal reasons usually, and in those cases it makes sense for them to be able to draw so that way they're able to still communicate without the need to speak. Or for example, in artistic applications, it can be incredibly useful for just plain up drawing trees or landscapes or whatever have you. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you exactly how you can set up a very simple drawing spline mesh so that way you're able to draw whatever you would like in a world. But before we go and jump to that, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more just like this one, be sure to like and subscribe button down below. And with that, let's jump right into the video. Alright, so let's go ahead and see exactly how all this functions. So I have gone ahead and set up a drawing on my right hand. So what I can go and do is just press trigger and simply start drawing. And I can do multiple segments at once. Those eyes actually don't turn out very well because they're a little bit flat in there. But that does kind of give you a general idea. We got like a nice little smiley face there. I can also do other shapes too. Obviously, you know, I can do star, whatever, circle, triangle, and list goes on and on and on and on. And then to delete it, all I do is press trigger left and it deletes everything. So it's a very nice, very simple way to just go about and create a simple drawing system. And I can do it in a fully 3D space. It's not in a flat space, as you can see. I could do just whatever this is. So yeah, as you can see, this works really well and allows for you to just draw around, erase whatever it is that you've drawn. And it's very simple, very easy to do. I'm going to show you exactly how you can do it. With that, let's go ahead and jump right into the tutorial. First off, let's start by opening up our VR pawn. We obviously need some kind of pawn in order to actually add this drawing system to. So if you're using the VR template, the VR pawn is a great way to start off. Once you have your VR pawn open and you're in the event graph, go ahead and grab your trigger right and trigger left. These two buttons are going to be used for different things. Our trigger right is going to be used in order to actually start and end the drawing, and trigger left is going to be used in order to delete our drawing once we want to delete it. In addition to this, we're also going to need the event tick. The trigger right and the event tick are both going to be used kind of hand in hand, so we're going to be designing both of those at the same time. But before we get started with any of these, let's first go ahead and set up a few variables that we're going to need. In total, we're going to need 4 different variables. First one's going to be previous location, and this is going to be a vector. This is going to store whatever the previous location of our motion controller is, so that way we can draw a spline at a specific distance from our previous spline mesh. The second one is going to be called distance. This is going to keep track of how far we've traveled from the last point in our mesh. The third one is going to be called drawing splines, and this is going to be an array of spline mesh components. This is what's going to actually hold all of our drawing meshes and form whatever drawing that we're trying to create. Then the last variable is going to be called last point, and this one's going to be an integer. Now the reason for this one is this one's going to keep track of when our current segment of drawing has ended and whenever we start a new segment. Without this, we're actually going to end up, when we stop drawing and then start drawing again, we'll actually end up with a line that goes from where we stopped to where we started, and this is going to help us keep that from happening. Once you have those 4 variables in place, let's go ahead and get started in our event graph with the trigger right. In the trigger right, we want to do a couple things. First off, we want to set previous location to be equal to our motion controller right's current world location. This will give us a starting point rather than the world origin or wherever we last stopped on our drawing spline. Next, we also want to go ahead and set distance to 0. This is just going to help us reset so that way our drawing will come out pretty nicely. Then the last thing is we want to set last point. Last point is going to be equal to our drawing spline's length. By making this equal to our drawing spline's length, this will allow for us to determine when our last segment of the spline ended and where our current spline has started. So that way we're able to, like I said, separate off so we can draw a circle, for example, then a line over here without having those two connect. Once you have these 3 variables set up, let's go ahead and move on to our event tick. First thing we want to do is in our event tick, we want to add a gate. Now, in case you're unfamiliar with the gate, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. What it allows for us to do is it allows for us to, at any point, open or close this node, allowing for us to control whether or not we want to continue or not. So in this example, the reason for opening and closing this gate is going to allow for us to start and stop drawing. With that in mind, to open our gate, we're going to want to drag in from the end of our trigger right. Then we're going to close this gate whenever we release our trigger right. Another quick note, you want to make sure that this gate starts as closed. If we start it as open, then we might accidentally end up where we start drawing immediately, even though we're not pressing the trigger and we don't mean to be drawing. So make sure that starts off as closed first. Next, let's go ahead and determine when it's time for us to actually draw our spline. In order to do this, we're going to go ahead and get the world location of our motion control right, and we're going to compare that with our previous location to find the distance between these two vectors. Once we found the distance between these two vectors, we're then going to go ahead and add this on to the distance variable that we created, and then we're going to set this as our new distance value. This will allow for us to determine how far our hand has traveled from our last position. Then we want to also go ahead and set our previous location again to be equal to our right motion controller's current world location. This will allow for us to continue incrementing that distance as we continue to move our hand around. After we've set this new location, we then want to check to see if our distance is greater than or equal to some value and pass this into a branch. Now for this example, I'm setting this value to 1. However, you can really set this to any value. The greater the value, the greater this distance has to be, and the less accurate this drawing is actually going to look. The smaller this value is, the closer in distance these splines are going to be, and that's also going to make our spline a lot more accurate as we're drawing. Now, assuming that this branch is true, we're then going to want to set our distance back to 0. This is going to reset and allow for us to determine when we've traveled another 1 unit. Then after that, it's time to finally draw our spline mesh component. To do this, I'm going to go ahead and add a spline mesh component, and then I'm first off going to go ahead and break the transform location. I'm going to do this that way our transform location is going to be at the world origin, since we're going to be saying everything in the world space, not necessarily the relative space. Once we've created this spline mesh component, we also want to click on this, head into the details panel, and we also want to give this spline mesh component some sort of static mesh. For this example, I'm going to go and set it to the line segment cylinder. Since this is a default mesh that's used by default in the VR template, and will offer us to pretty easily just have a spline mesh that we can use. After you've created this spline mesh component, we then want to store this in the drawing splines by adding this on. We're also going to need this add for later, so just keep in mind where this is as well. Then using our spline mesh component, we also want to go ahead and set the end position. The end position in any scenario is going to be the current location of our right motion controller, since that's going to be our current point where our hand is right now. Then after setting our end position, we then need to set our start position. And our start position is going to be a little bit weird, depending on if this is the first mesh in our start position or if this is anything after that. To determine what mesh this is, we're going to go ahead and get that float return value in the add node that we just made, and we're going to check to see if this is greater than last point. This will allow for us to also split up the segment, like I had said earlier, if we want to have a circle, stop drawing, and then have a line somewhere else. This will allow us to determine if we are now drawing a new segment of the same drawing, or if this is the same drawing altogether. Once you've run this greater than, go ahead and pass this into a branch, and then we need to set the start position on both the true and false, but each of these values is going to be different. Starting off with true, if our start position is true, we're going to go ahead and get the return float value, subtract that by 1, then we're going to go ahead and get this value from the drawing splines. This will give us our last spline location, and using this we can get the end position of that spline and set as the start position of this spline. However, if this branch is false, then we're going to want to set the start position to the motion controller right's current world location. This will set both the start and end to the same position and just give us a pretty nice looking start. Now that our drawing system is all set up, the last step is simply clearing off our splines. And this is pretty simple. In order to do this, all we want to do is go back to our trigger left pressed, and on trigger left press, we're going to go ahead and get our drawing spheres, pass that through a for each loop. Then in the for each loop, we're going to destroy each component, and then once this for each loop is completed, we're going to go ahead and clear our drawing splines. And that's it. With that, we now have a very simple drawing system that allows for us to draw splines and multiple segments of splines at that, as many times as we would want, and then go ahead and delete that at any point. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, be sure to like the subscribe button down below. And with that, I'll see you in the next reality.